We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Monday the 25th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Emily Carver.
Yes, now soldiers are on standby. The army is called in as London's firearm officers hand in their weapons after an officer was charged with the murder of Chris Kabar.
Gross act of vandalism, that's how the former Chancellor George Osborne would describe scrapping the HS2 line to Manchester. What do you think?
Bankrupt Birmingham, the Alexander Stadium, Library of Birmingham, Museum, Art Gallery could all go up for sale later as the Labour Council tries to balance the books.
And last orders, calls for traditional pub phrases such as one for the road to be banned to discourage binge drinking. Oh dear, is anything sacred?
And as always, please do let us know what you think about those talking points. Banning those phrases, Andrew.
Stupid. Not
Stupid.
going to stop me having a third vodka and tonic.
Get in.
Vodka and soda.
Vodka and soda.
Yeah.
But yes, get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get the news with Aaron.
Very good morning to you. It is 9:31. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. In the last few minutes, Rishi Sunak has insisted he is committed to levelling up, but has refused to address speculation the northern leg of HS2 is to be scrapped. The Prime Minister wouldn't guarantee the Birmingham to Manchester leg will be completed. He will discuss it, though, with the Chancellor this week, with a decision expected before the Tory party conference in Manchester next week. The planned line to East Midlands Parkway may also be under threat.
This kind of speculation that people are, making is not right. I mean, we've got spades in the ground, we're getting on and delivering, but across the north, what we're also doing is connecting up all the towns and cities in the north, east to west. That's a really important part of how we will create jobs, drive growth across the region, all part of our plans to level up. Free ports are another good example of that, whether that's in Teesside or elsewhere, attracting new investment, new businesses coming in, all good examples of the government levelling up.
Scotland Yard is calling for changes to how armed police are held to account after dozens of officers have refused to go on firearms duty. Some have stepped back from armed duties after a colleague was charged with the murder of Chris Kabar, who was shot in South London last year. Sir Mark Rowley has welcomed a review into the situation by the Home Secretary, but says police are being undermined by the current system, which is not set up to help them succeed. Suella Braverman says officers must have the confidence to do their job. The Army has been put on standby to fill in. The number of NHS appointments cancelled because of strikes in England is expected to surpass 1 million. NHS providers estimate the first ever double strike action by junior doctors and consultants last week means the country will reach the milestone in figures set to be announced today. The organisation's Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Cordery, has labelled it damaging and demoralising and says behind every day there is a real and human cost. Well, plenty more to come throughout the morning here on GB News. There's also more on our website, gbnews.com. And now it's back to Andrew and Emily.
Well, I'm here with Emily Carver, which is a complete joy for me.
It's a delight.
Yeah. And we've got a packed programme and a big issue, and we've got some very strong political guests this morning, are what happens to HS2. Emily, we've spent £19 billion on it already, potentially another 11 million committed, and the Prime Minister may be about to ditch the line from London to Manchester. What, in the week the Tories are going to Manchester for the Tory conference? That's a great optic.
No, yeah, it's a terrible optic, isn't it? And I mean, it was supposed to go from Euston.
Yeah.
Now it may be going from somewhere close to Acton in West London.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, if it stops at Birmingham, who's going to even bother taking that line?
Well, it was also supposed to go into Leeds as well, but the Leeds line was dropped earlier. Now we think we're going to drop Manchester, so it's effectively we'll be spending £30 billion to get to Birmingham 10 minutes quicker.
Now, Andrew, I'm not sure the cost-benefit analysis has ever been good on this project.
No.
Is it time to scrap the lot?
Well, you see, I don't think it is. But then when I read Michael Heseltine writing in the Times that we've got to keep it, I think perhaps I'm wrong, because I can't possibly be in agreement with Michael Heseltine, because he's going to be banging on about going back into the European Union at any moment. But we wonder what you think about it, because it's a big, big story. And of course, Andy Burnham, the mayor of the North, what do they call himself? The King of the North. He will make hay with this.
Well, the thing is, Keir Starmer says they'd stick with it. Labour is saying they'd stick with it. They'd do the whole thing. But a little video clip has come out of Keir Starmer saying the exact opposite not too long ago in the House of Commons. So,
Mr. U-turn.
Mr. U-turn there.
And what do we think about Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister? He says countries like Saudi Arabia should pay a climate tax. Good luck. How are you going to get them to pay that then?
A windfall tax on countries like Norway, Saudi Arabia, Qatar probably.
Yeah.
All of these oil-producing countries. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to say, sure, yeah,
Good
take
idea,
our money.
Gordon. He did try and save the world, if you remember, during the 2008 financial bailout, and he did actually tell the House of Commons, I did put together a plan to save the world, and what he meant was to save Britain, but it slipped. But he was, to be fair, a big key figure in the forming of G20 and all this, and it's not a bad idea, but how do you persuade Saudi Arabia to do anything they don't want to do?
I mean, practically, it's a nonsense.
It is.
It's an absolute nonsense. And, you know, the self-importance of thinking that you can decide a policy for the world is quite something.
Well, self-importance of former Prime Ministers. There's a few like that.
Mr. Tony Blair, for one.
Yeah, who's advising, don't forget, Keir Starmer. He is the ultimate backseat driver. Now, coming up, we're talking about soldiers which are on standby. It's reported more than 100 Metropolitan Police officers have laid down their firearms duties.
Yes, this is all over the front pages, actually. This is after a murder charge against one of their colleagues over the death of the unarmed man, Chris Cabba, last year.
Well, his death sparked protests in the community, with his family saying they wouldn't rest until they got justice. Well, by great coincidence, and we're delighted, in the studio with us, former Defence Secretary Liam Fox. Liam, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, straight in there saying that she will ensure that the Army, if necessary, step in. We're not going to see the Army on the streets, though, are we? Isn't this going to be the SAS undercover involved in counter-terrorism work if there is a gap with the police?
Well, the first thing is to go back to first principles.
Yeah.
The first duty of government is the protection of the public. Yeah. So they have to do whatever is required to make sure that the public are protected. I imagine that the first thing will be to try to get other officers from other forces first, and if the gaps can't be filled that way, then elements of the military might be used for that. The military are always reticent about getting involved in that. But I think there are some really important issues here, because if the government has a first duty to protect the public, they need the police to do it. So they need the police to be happy about the rules under which they're operating, and clearly they're not. And I am very much in line with the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary here, that the police need to be sure that when they're following the guidelines and the training that they've been given, that they will be able to operate without being afraid of being in court.
I hear that, but some people will be thinking, you've also got to ensure that citizens are protected from police officers who make that split-second judgment and get it wrong.
Well,
about shooting a gun.
Sure, if they are following the rules and the training, that's one thing. And I think this is what the police are saying. Yeah. We need to be sure that the training that we receive and the rules under which we operate will mean that when we are taking these split-second decisions, we're not wondering at the back of our minds, should I or shouldn't I, for legal reasons. Now, the police, of course, have to be held to account for their actions like everybody else, but I'm not sure that that's quite the primary point here. The point that the police are making is, when we're operating within the things that we were taught to do and the rules that are set for us, shouldn't we reasonably expect that we don't end up as a result of CPS action in front of the courts?
Is it irresponsible, though? Because some people will be looking at this and thinking, perhaps it's a bit irresponsible of the police officers to do this, these armed officers, to put their guns down, to say, you know what, we're not going to be out there and protect. Is it reckless?
It is, to a point. I think most people...
They signed up for this job.
Most people will think that. but that they also themselves will be saying, if we are to do our job and protect the public properly, we need to get the balance right. So it's one of these very difficult. There's no absolute right or wrong in this. It's a question of degree. And the quicker it's sorted out, the better, because we need to make sure that the public are protected, number one. And we need to keep that at the back of our minds, that the government's job is not to protect the police. The police's job is to protect the public on behalf of the government.
And will the army do, if they're bidden by the Home Secretary, will they do, as asked, will they go undercover with guns, if necessary, to get involved on the streets?
Yes, I'm sure they would if required, but I'm sure they're also, as I say, very reticent about doing so, because that job is properly done by the civilian police in our country. So it's getting that, it's like so many things in politics, getting the balance right between ensuring the police are held to account to the highest standards, but also that they feel that they can operate safely
and Mark
without
Rayleigh,
fear.
The Commissioner clearly has got a problem, because he's spoken out this morning saying, look, where's the clarity here? We need new clarity on this.
And I think that's right, and I think that needs to be done, and done urgently.
I do feel for the army sometimes. They're always asked to cover when public services go... Well, you go, but it's interesting though, because of course the Casey report did talk about a troubling toxic culture in the Met's Specialist Firearms Command.
She did.
So there's lots of answers. There's lots of questions to be asked about how the Met Police is functioning, and then you have these police officers just putting their guns down.
And it's about 100, we think, Liam. How much could that affect operational efficiency? 100 firearms officers withdrawing their guns?
I suppose that depends
if something
what the pattern of shifting is and how many would be on duty at any one time, how that would affect it. But I think it's the principle here, isn't it, that they are saying if we're asked to protect the public using firearms, and we have to make these difficult split-second decisions, shouldn't we expect that if we're following the guidelines that we've set, that will not end up in court? That seems to me a perfectly reasonable thing for them to want. And if the guidelines and the training are not making that crystal clear, then that needs to be addressed.
Let's talk about HS2. Everyone's talking about HS2. I'm glad Emily's pointed out that Keir Starmer, Labour say well, actually, last week there were 3 different positions taken by Labour front benches, but we now...
Is that all?
Yeah, exactly. 48 hours.
Is that all?
And Emily's found a clip of Keir Starmer completely saying the opposite to what he's saying now. But should they press ahead from Birmingham to Manchester? Leeds has already gone. Liam, we've already spent £19 billion on this wretched thing to Birmingham. What's the point of it?
We always have these big debates, don't we, about public infrastructure projects.
Because the governments are so bad at them.
But remember Crossrail?
Yeah, that went...
How long Crossrail took and how much Crossrail was inflated. Now, anyone who uses the Elizabeth line today will say it's the biggest improvement in public transport in London.
It's not the same, though, is it? Because HS2 has caused so much disruption. The government was warned time and time again that the costs were spiralling, that the cost-benefit analysis just wasn't there, and now it's not even going to the north.
Well, so I think the question is, as with all these great projects, you go back to the Victorian era, there were always the same debates about the long-term cost, and once they're done, people forget what that cost was. I think the thing is the focus has always been on times. How quickly can we get from A to B? And, not everyone in the world thinks that life begins and ends in London, and how quickly you can get to London is the measure of quality of life. The thing is capacity, and how will we create more capacity on the railways to get more freight, in particular, off the roads. And that, I think, is something that we should be focusing the debate on. How does that happen? Where is it needed most? And to be looking at sequencing any of this that goes ahead. The idea that everything needs to go ahead at one time doesn't seem to me to make much sense. If we have to sequence any investment, then let's do that and see.
The problem is it's cheaper.
Does sequence mean delay?
Sorry?
Does sequence mean delay?
Well, we've got delay at the moment. Yeah. So it's a fact of life. The question is, what order do you put these bits of projects in? Clearly, the public purse at the moment is too strained to do everything at once. So what's the need, based on capacity, not time of getting to London, that we actually need to make these decisions?
But the capacity argument has weakened, has it not? I think it was Kemi Badenoch who was saying, with work from home culture following the pandemic, we don't actually need the capacity that we thought we did. So the economic benefit isn't there when it comes to capacity either. And then you're only going to Birmingham.
Well,
This is the issue.
Well, if you want to create more capacity across the railways as a whole, I mean, if you're working from home and you're shopping on Amazon, it doesn't get to you by magic. It requires to travel on the transport network. So we need to think about these things logically and start from the basis of what's the economic benefit, what's the capacity we require, where do we require that capacity. I long argued, for example, that what you needed was a railway from the west to the east coast that could go from the port in Liverpool, which can now carry vessels. Anything that can go through the Panama Canal can now come to Liverpool. How do we get those goods to the North Sea to be able to create Britain as a transport hub?
And that'd be real levelling up.
So these are the sort of economics first arguments, not politics first. I think where we fall down on these big public sector procurements is when we start to put the politics ahead of the economics, and that's what I think we need to be rational and operate from first principles.
A lot of people writing in saying, why didn't they start in the north with this project? Why did it start
go from
down south?
Because now Ealing to Birmingham, as opposed to starting going down from Leeds.
Everything starts in London. You know, as a West Country MP, you know, we don't all believe that every journey you have needs to begin or end in London.
And you know, there was a very good point made in a letter in the Times the other day that when the Channel Tunnel film went through the Commons, the whole plan was that people up in Manchester, I wrote it down, Manchester, Cardiff, Plymouth, Glasgow, would be able to get a train directly to the continent. They would be linked up. It didn't happen, so the north was abandoned again. Can the Tories risk doing that again?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think we need to look at the economic case, and I think if the case is strong, that it continues, then it should continue. If it has to be staggered because of public finances, let's do that. But let's have a rational solution. Yeah,
I mean, we were discussing the optics of this at Conservative Party conference.
It'd be terrible. I mean, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester, will just kill the Tories if they cancel it two days before they go to Manchester. And there's a rail strike as well going into Manchester.
Yeah, of course, he won't say where the money's coming from because he's not responsible for raising the money. And that's the other thing. The government have got to be responsible because we're answerable to taxpayers. Because, I mean, I hate to say it, and on this channel more than any other, where it's almost taken as read, there is no such thing as government money. There is only taxpayers' money.
There's so much government waste, and that's what really gets on people's nerves.
Can we ask, because we've got you here, you're a GP, that's your job, that's what you were for. This blimmin' health strike is going on and on, these doctors and consultants combining forces, which is going to cost lives. What do you say to your former colleagues in the medical profession?
I personally find it deeply unethical that should happen. And I think it is quite wrong that it should be timed to maximise the difficulty inside the NHS. I would have thought that was at odds with what your basic promises are as a doctor. I also find it quite strange, if I may say, commenting on the reporting of this, that when we get the rail strikes, we'll say it's ASLEF or whatever rail union it is, but we never say it's the BMA. We simply refer to doctors. Not all doctors are on strike. And the real heroes in the NHS are those doctors who are carrying on, making sure that patients are looked after while other doctors are walking off the wards.
Do you accept doctors and clinicians have a case for more pay?
I think that lots of people have a case for more pay.
A strong case, and one that the government needs to listen to.
No, and I think that they have already had a substantial pay rise. Of course, they are paid, because of the way doctors are paid, especially hospital doctors, as I know, having worked there, a lot more than what the basic pay is what you take home. And I think that the government need to explain to people that the difference between what the basic pay is and what doctors actually get is quite large, because I think that the public sympathy might be a lot less.
Lee, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've just received some breaking news here. Andrew, do you want to?
Yeah, well, we're told that every Metropolitan Police counter-terrorism firearms officer has stepped back from armed duties. Wow. Apart from 5 officers who are on annual leave, this is a worsening crisis around armed policing. Almost armed responses vehicles in the capital have also opted for a period of reflection. They've handed in their firearms authorisation tickets. Senior Met Police commanders are in crisis discussions to try to ensure the capital has an adequate response. Liam, this is a dramatic escalation.
It is, and I think it reinforces the point that we were making, that there is a point of principle here that needs to be sorted very quickly. I think that the instincts of the Home Secretary are entirely correct, and I hope that she is given the hand to get this sorted as quickly as possible. I think on both sides there's a will to get it sorted, but I think that this position increases the urgency.
This is a strike that could put our safety at risk.
Well, and we're being told that there were 2 armed response vehicles patrolling London last night instead of 15, and it'll be the same tonight. Look, all sorts of thugs with guns are listening to this, watching this. It's pushing at an open door for them.
It is why, as I say, there is now a real urgency to get this resolved, and perhaps understanding the importance of what is now clearly going to be a crisis situation will get all parties to be involved in getting that solution as quickly as possible.
Officers from outside of London are apparently refusing to come in to help out. Is the capital now a serious security risk?
Well, I wouldn't say that. As we've said, that there are elements of the military that can be brought in to do that. And I think it would also be a good rule for all of us not to talk up the risks or to talk up the fear, which can only help the criminal classes, not the law-abiding public.
It's probably worth just reiterating what the news is. We've been told that every Met Police counter-terrorism firearms officer has stepped back now from armed duties, apart from 5 officers who are on annual leave.
Yeah, that's about 3,000. That is an extraordinary thing. Have you ever known that in your long career in politics?
No, I've never known that to happen, and I think it is of enormous importance and seriousness. And I think that I can never remember a case where I thought people better be round that table by lunchtime today and getting it sorted out.
So, I mean, the Prime Minister needs to put...
Well, the Prime Minister has said, very much he supports the Home Secretary, which is a great thing because clearly that reinforces her authority in this to be able to get the sort of solution that is necessary, not just desirable.
Will it involve the what's the emergency committee that they have?
Cobra.
Cobra. Do you think they have to?
No, there's a separate mechanism.
Is there?
For it, yeah.
Presumably the Home Secretary will have to now talk to the public and tell us what this all means.
Yeah.
Because, deeply concerning breaking news there.
And that's all. This is all linked to. We can't go into the detail, but a police officer has been arrested in connection with the shooting of a man in an unmarked car. Yeah,
this is a move in solidarity with that police officer. So we're joined now by Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, Steve McCabe. Steve, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Is Steve there? Yes, he is. Fantastic.
Good morning.
Just to get your reaction to that breaking news, really, all firearms officers have put down their guns off duty.
Well, it sounds a pretty serious issue. I'm not sure exactly what the implications of it are, but as you say, it's obviously in response to this officer who's been charged. And I guess there must be some question marks when police officers make split-second decisions. If I'm not saying they should be given total immunity, but there must be some question marks if they find themselves in court on serious charges when we're asking them to make split-second decisions in those kind of situations.
Steve, do they need more rights, if you like, than an ordinary citizen who may have a gun?
Well, I am suggesting that we are asking them, just as we do with soldiers, to do something quite serious on our behalf, and it's possibly not the right that we equate that with, say, any civilian picking up a firearm and using it.
Yes, they need to feel supported and that they're going to get a fair hearing. That's clearly what this is all about. Should we move on to Birmingham City Council?
They're flogging off all your major assets, Steve, if you don't mind me phrasing it like that, in Birmingham, because your council has squandered millions. It's bankrupt, the largest local authority in Europe, and the government are having to step in to bail out your local taxpayers.
Yes, well, that is Michael Gove's response to the problems in Birmingham. He's appointed a commissioner, and one of the things that will be considered is to sell off the assets of the city and the people of Birmingham,
Well, what conversations have you been having with those at Birmingham Council about how they got into this state? I mean, I'm just thinking about people who live in Birmingham and rely on the council for basic services. They've really made a mess up of the finances, and I don't think that this can be blamed on the government.
Well, I did read the Commissioner's comments, Max Collar, in I think it was the FT just the other day, where he says, actually, once a Commissioner's appointed there's no purpose in looking back. You have to just look forward. So I'll just put that to you. But obviously, there are problems in Birmingham. I'm not going to disguise it. Some of those problems rest with the councillors, with council officers, with trade unions. Equal pay issue has been a mess.
Steve, I'm terribly sorry, but we're going to... Steve, thank you so much for your time. Terribly sorry, but we're massively squeezed because of the breaking news. Steve McCabe, MP there, Labour, Birmingham, Selly Oak.
We'll catch up with him in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference.
We will
doing next? Up next?
Up next, we're going to Lampedusa.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, we will see some sunnier and brighter moments, but watch out for Wednesday. Could turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now. Lots of sunshine out there, actually, across parts of England and Wales. Still maybe a little bit of overnight rain and cloud just to clear the very far southeast. But for most of us, really, it's a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing the main bulk of the showers, and some of these could potentially be quite heavy, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder. And still quite windy here. That will temper the temperatures somewhat, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs reaching 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, a lot of England and Wales remaining dry. Still the risk of some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially across more western areas. Elsewhere, under the clear skies, we could see some mist and fog also forming. And then later on in the night, just starting to potentially see some heavy showers working in across the very far south coast of England. A mild night for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in double figures. So these showers will then track their way northwards across parts of England as we go through the course of the morning. Elsewhere, once any early mist and fog clears, briefly drier and brighter, but then further bands of rain moving in from the west, which will be accompanied again by some fairly strong winds, heaviest of the rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But despite the wind, it's going to be another fairly mild one. Temperatures high teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
The temperature's rising.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It is exactly 10 a.m. on Monday, 25th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. I'm Emily Carver. This is Andrew Pearce. Now, as Europe's migration crisis worsens, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is live on the front line.
I'm here on the Italian island of Lampedusa, where more than 11,000 migrants have arrived in the last week. And of course, we know that many of those migrants will make it to the shores of northwestern France in an attempt to reach the UK.
London at risk. GB News learns all Metropolitan Police firearms officers have stepped back in protest at the charging of one of their colleagues with murder. Crisis talks are underway.
Inheritance tax cut. Rishi Sunak is considering slashing the most hated tax in Britain. But is it a vote winner?
And pushy pubs. Do bar staff using language like same again, or is that a double, put pressure on people like me to drink? Or are people just going a bit too wokey and soft?
I think I know what you think.
Yeah.
And as always, we'd love to hear what you think about all of those topics. Please do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com, or tweet us at gbnews, X us at gbnews.
Indeed.
Shall we get the news with Aaron Armstrong?
I think we should.
A very good morning to you. It is a minute past 10. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Well, GB News can exclusively reveal all counter-terrorism officers in London have stepped back from armed duties amid an escalating crisis over their legal protection. It comes after a police officer was charged with murder over the shooting of Chris Kaba, an unarmed 24-year-old in South London last year. In addition, almost all armed response vehicles in the capital have also opted for a period of reflection and have handed in their firearms permits. Senior Met Police commanders are in crisis discussions to try to ensure the capital has an adequate armed response. Two incidents, the military's been put on standby to respond in the event of a terrorist attack. We'll have more on this very shortly with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Also in the last hour, Rishi Sunak's refused to address speculation the northern leg of HS2 is to be scrapped, but insists he is committed to levelling up. The Prime Minister wouldn't guarantee the completion of the planned Birmingham to Manchester line amid spiralling costs. He'll discuss it with the Chancellor in the coming days, and a decision is expected before the Tory party conference in Manchester next week. The planned line to East Midlands Parkway is also under threat.
This kind of speculation that people are, making is not right. I mean, we've got spades in the ground, we're getting on and delivering, but across the north, what we're also doing is connecting up all the towns and cities in the north, east to west. That's a really important part of how we will create jobs, drive growth across the region, all part of our plans to level up. Free ports are another good example of that, whether that's in Teesside or elsewhere, attracting new investment, new businesses coming in, all good examples of the government levelling up.
The Home Secretary will call for unity amongst Western leaders to combat the global migration crisis. Suella Braverman will tell an audience in Washington other countries can learn from the UK's attempts to tackle illegal migrants. She is questioning whether conventions and legal frameworks designed more than 50 years ago are still fit for purpose, and is calling for a shake-up of international rules. The number of NHS appointments cancelled because of strikes in England is expected to surpass 1 million. NHS providers estimate the first ever double strike action by junior doctors and consultants last week means the country will reach the milestone in figures set to be announced today. The organisation's Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Cordery, has labelled it damaging and demoralising and says behind every day there is a real and human cost. It comes as new figures show almost 400,000 patients waited 24 hours or more in A&E in England last year. The Royal College of Emergency Medicines calling the situation a matter of national shame. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says 24 hours in A&E is no longer just a documentary. But the Department of Health and Social Care says the NHS recovery plan is bringing improvements. Prosecutors will decide later over whether to call for a retrial of Lucy Letby on 6 counts of attempted murder. The former nurse was jailed for life last month for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others at a hospital in Chester in 2015 and 2016. However, jurors were unable to reach a verdict on 6 further counts of attempted murder in relation to 5 children. She denied the charges and has launched an appeal. Experts are warning the government will not meet its manifesto pledge to end homelessness by next year. The Kerslake Commission says there are chronic and unresolved issues in the housing system, with a crisis pushing more people onto the streets. The number of people sleeping rough last autumn was 25% higher than it was at the same time 3 years ago. The government claims it's spending £2 billion to end rough sleeping for good. Police are searching for a missing mother. They've arrested a 31-year-old woman who attended an East London police station. The woman was also taken to hospital as a precaution. 2 children reported missing from a centre for vulnerable mothers and children in London were found safe and well in Harwich earlier today. Officers were looking for 31-year-old Jamie Lee Kelly, who left the facility on Tuesday with her 3-year-old daughter and newborn baby boy. This is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News. That's it. Now back to Andrew and Emily.
Did you see me doing that? Breaking news in the last
Very
half
professional,
an hour.
Andrew.
Yes, sorry. GB News has learnt that every Metropolitan Police counter-terrorism firearms officer has stepped back and effectively put down their guns after one of their colleagues was charged with murder.
Yes, crisis talks are now underway and the Army is on standby to patrol the streets if needed, which presumably it will be.
Absolutely. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, broke the story. He's in Lampedusa covering the migrant crisis, but we're going to go to him live. Mark, this is a major escalation. It started off, we think, with a few officers putting down their guns. Now this has become a big, big crisis for the Met and for the Home Office and for the government.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt from what we're hearing, it is a worsening crisis with more and more armed officers from a number of different divisions deciding that they're going to support their colleagues in the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Special Firearms Unit with their protest. And that is a protest to a decision by the Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute an officer, charge him with murder. That officer, known only as NX121, appeared in court last Thursday charged with the murder of Chris Cabba in South London in September of last year. Now, these Metropolitan Police firearms officers feel that they're not being supported, that they have to make split-second decisions in the most difficult of circumstances, and that a decision to prosecute an officer for murder throws the whole way that they operate into a different light. And they are very, very concerned going forward that similar prosecutions may well be on the cards for any officer that in those unfortunate split-second decisions might have to open fire. So what you have initially is a protest by those counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers. These are the elite firearms teams in the Metropolitan Police. They have a degree of training that is over and above the armed response vehicles that you see driving about London and every major city in the country. They can rappel down ropes through buildings. They know about how to enter dynamically into buildings to rescue hostages and deal with terrorists, all that kind of threat. So those officers, out of real concern, they say, for what the situation is unfolding, decided that they wanted a period of reflection, they call it. In other words, they were handing in their blue ticket. Now, the blue ticket is a ticket that authorises them to use firearms. While they reflect on what's happening and the support they feel that is lacking from senior management within the Metropolitan Police. They decided to do that. What I understand is that there was a meeting that involved a Deputy Assistant Commissioner just in recent days, and that appears to have escalated the situation because those firearms officers said that they would be willing to respond to threat to life incidents and also terrorism incidents. That Deputy Assistant Commissioner, according to one source speaking to me, said that it doesn't work like that. So the officers had then decided, well, if that's the case, we're just handing in our blue tickets. We're not going to respond or do any kind of firearms duties. So they, pretty much every counter-terrorism specialist firearms officer, apart from 5 who are on annual leave, according to our source, have handed in their blue tickets. And it's worse than that because we're also hearing that counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers in other forces are in solidarity with their colleagues in London, not prepared to come and backfill in the capital. And it's spread to the armed response vehicles as well in an escalation. So these are the vehicles that we see, of course, in our cities, towns and cities right across the country, responding to gun crime, knife crime, lots of other threats to life incidents. Those armed response vehicles are coming out in solidarity with those counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers, and most of them have handed in their blue tickets. Our source told us that last night there was supposed to be 15 armed response vehicles on duty across the capital. There were 2. And that's got, of course, Met management scrambling to try to backfill, to try to bring armed response vehicles in from neighbouring forces to help police the capital in an adequate manner.
Mark, you're so plugged into all of this. People watching and listening to this programme are going to think the same thing. Is the capital safe?
Well, to an extent, of course, it is safe. There are armed units out there, and in extremis, of course, they would be able to call on more support, and officers that are currently off duty and effectively refusing to work would come in and work. Of course they would. That's their job and their duty. But at the moment they're in a protest, so there's a lag time. If anything was to happen, there would be a lag time before full resources were brought to bear on an incident, and that has got to impact on safety. Of course it does.
Yeah, I think most people will be concerned, considering we do, unfortunately, have a terror threat in this country. Moving on to what you are in Lampedusa for. 10,000 migrants, am I right, arrived on the island in just the past week. What's happened since? Are they getting a grip on this? Are people still arriving in those numbers?
More than 11,000 actually just in over a week arrived here in Lampedusa, and the islanders have been given a bit of respite actually by virtue of the Mistral winds which are blowing out in the Mediterranean at the moment, are making it very difficult for these migrant boats. So that's reduced the numbers that are coming into Lampedusa. When we arrived last night in Lampedusa, we filmed as dozens of police officers, Italian police officers, arrived at the airport to help supplement their colleagues here, knowing that, of course, when these Mistral winds do die down in a couple of days' time, then the boats will be back with a vengeance. Now, this is an island of only about 6,000 permanent residents, so there would only be a dozen officers really on duty at any one time. There are hundreds here now because of the very significant concerns about the numbers of migrants coming here, the potential for unrest, as we saw in the last week when many thousands arrived just in 2 or 3 days, and they were jumping over the walls of the compound that they were in, understandably, I think, because that compound was only due to actually hold 400. Its capacity is 400 migrants, and it was holding many thousands of migrants. So some real chaos on the island, and the authorities calling for help last week. Now, last night also when we arrived, we were out in the early hours of the morning at an area in the harbour. We filmed an area we're not allowed into during the day, but that gave us an indication of all these boats, these empty boats that are in the harbour there, just dozens of them, and that's just a tiny selection of the boats that have been coming across in recent months. Now, just like they do in the UK with Border Force painting numbers on the boats that they recover, they painted numbers on the boats here. I saw one, 975-23, so that was the 975th boat that the border officials had seized in this year of 23. And that's just that boat. There may be many more than that 975. Clearly, there is a very significant problem. The Italians say that more than twice last year's total have already crossed this year. 130,000 or so have crossed the Mediterranean, many of them ending up here in Lampedusa.
I really appreciate your time. Considering the numbers of people arriving in Europe and then travelling to the UK via the Channel, Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, is going to be in Washington today or tomorrow. She's going to be giving a big speech where she's going to question the basis for international refugee treaties. What are you expecting to hear from her?
Yeah, well, she wants the Western countries in particular to come together, really, with one voice to try to tackle this global migration crisis, which could see 100 million people moving out to look for new lives in Western countries in the coming years. And she believes that that needs to be redrawn, that they need to work together to ensure that those crossing illegally are prevented from doing that. So that involves, of course, going after the likes of the people smugglers, international law enforcement working together, also enlisting the help of social media companies to ensure that the traffickers can't advertise on social media. So all manner of things, toughening up the border response as well to ensure that those migrants coming to the likes of the European Union are returned back to North Africa.
Fascinating.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor from Lampedusa, bringing us the very latest from the Met Police and then also from the migrant crisis that keeps on going. Well, should we speak to immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson to get his thoughts on all of that? Ivan, thank you for joining us. You heard Mark White there live from Lampedusa. 11,000 people crossing to that small little island in the middle of the sea in just a week. How on earth can Europe get a grip on this?
Well, there are 18 million displaced people around the world, and the problem's only going to get worse while we have conflicts around the world. I hate to say I agree with Suella Braverman, but I do agree with her. We need to relook at the Refugee Convention and the definition of what a refugee actually is. It's certainly not an economic migrant.
I was desperate to hear the rest of that.
Yes, because I often cross swords with Ivan Sampson, as you can well imagine, but interesting that he's agreeing with Suella Braverman, who I think actually, Emily, is one of the braver, feistier members of the cabinet. She puts her head on the parapet quite often, and she gets it kicked quite a lot, but she speaks out. And
a lot of people do distort what she says as well.
Yeah.
I mean, she says controversial things like invasion, but listen to what she's actually saying. Ivan is back with us. Thank you very much for coming back. There you are. So what's wrong with the Refugee Convention? Why is it not fit for purpose today?
Well, it was never designed for people displaced because of armed conflict, internal armed conflict. That was not the purpose of the Refugee Convention. It was designed for people fleeing persecution for one of the 5 heads, which is people of political persuasion, people because of their religion, because of their ethnicity or membership of a social group. For example, if you're gay and you're being persecuted and your government's not protecting you, then you can seek refugee status elsewhere. It was never designed for, if there's conflict in your country, you go to a safe third country. That was not the purpose of it. And I'm afraid at the moment, that's exactly what it's been used for by many of the people seeking protection in the United Kingdom.
From countries like where, Ivan?
Sorry, countries like?
Well, which are the countries where they're allegedly pursuing, fleeing armed conflict?
Well, for example, Yemen's a good example. Eritrea is a good example. Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not entitled to asylum in the UK, but the definition of an asylum seeker needs to be looked at. Secondly, this is a global problem, requires a global solution. I've been saying this, as you know, Andrew, for more than a year now, that the international community needs to come together and re-look at the global asylum problem. And each country needs to take their fair share of refugees. Pakistan has over 1 million refugees in its borders. So we need to relook at that.
Oh, he's gone again. Ivan Sampson, he's in Dubai, that's the issue. Sounds like he's in a hotel lobby of some description. Thank you very much indeed, Ivan Sampson, their immigration lawyer.
I've never been to Dubai and have no wish to go.
I wasn't sure what exactly he was saying there, whether we need to tighten up the definition of asylum seeker or allow it to be more broad.
No, I think
tighten it up.
Yeah, but also my big beef I often have with Ivan Sampson is how many of those people crossing the channel are economic migrants who aren't asylum seekers and they're coming here, all those young men in their 30s.
Well, exactly. I think a lot of people have noticed that too, Andrew.
Think so. Now, coming up, inheritance tax. It's loathed and hated by a lot of people. The Prime Minister, we think, is considering reforming it.
Yes, will he actually do it or will he bottle it? We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, we will see some sunnier and brighter moments, but watch out for Wednesday. Could turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now. Lots of sunshine out there, actually, across parts of England and Wales. Still maybe a little bit of overnight rain and cloud just to clear the very far southeast. But for most of us, really, it's a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing the main bulk of the showers, and some of these could potentially be quite heavy, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder. And still quite windy here. That will temper the temperatures somewhat, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs reaching 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, a lot of England and Wales remaining dry. Still the risk of some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially across more western areas. Elsewhere, under the clear skies, we could see some mist and fog also forming. And then later on in the night, just starting to potentially see some heavy showers working in across the very far south coast of England. A mild night for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in double figures. So these showers will then track their way northwards across parts of England as we go through the course of the morning. Elsewhere, once any early mist and fog clears, briefly drier and brighter, but then further bands of rain moving in from the west, which will be accompanied again by some fairly strong winds, heaviest of the rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But despite the wind, it's going to be another fairly mild one. Temperatures high teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:26 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Emily Carver.
You are indeed. Now, it's been reported, this has been all over the papers actually, that the Prime Minister is considering a cut to inheritance tax, and that's to court voters, create dividing lines between the Tories and the Labour Party.
So we've got our next
Oh, well,
guest.
here we go. At present, inheritance tax is charged at 40%.
For estates worth more than £325,000, but you get an extra £175,000 towards the main residence if you're a couple, £175,000 each if you pass it to a child, which means effectively £1 million.
So if you wanted to pass it on to a friend, then you wouldn't get that, allowance.
No.
A married couple could share their allowance, which means parents can pass on £1 million. Yes, OK, there we go.
Jonathan Portis knows all about tax. He's the Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. Jonathan, morning. I can still remember being at the Tory conference back in 2007, and George Osborne, the Shadow Chancellor, there was huge speculation that Gordon Brown was going to call an early general election. Labour were comfortably ahead in the polls, I'm sure you remember, and he said he was going to dramatically increase the threshold on inheritance tax. The Tories' poll rating soared, Gordon Brown was spooked, there was no election, we know what happened 3 years later. Why is this inheritance tax such a totemic issue for the Tories?
I think
there is a view among some people that they should be able, their parents have worked all their lives to save up money and perhaps to buy a house, and that they should be able to pass that on to their children. I think there's also a lot of misconceptions here. Remember, inheritance tax is really for people who are, it's not a tax that's paid by the people who are dying. It's paid by those who are inheriting, and it's only paid on about 4% of all estates. So we are really talking about the wealthiest in our society who are getting this windfall from their parents. And I can sort of understand why people think, well, my parents want to leave for me, why should the state take some of it? But the fact is that inheritance tax is primarily something that means that relatively well-off people don't get something that they didn't earn, that their parents earned. They only get 2/3 of it or a bit more. It hardly seems to me like the priority for tax cuts at the moment, quite frankly.
Jonathan, I think that's right in a way. A lot of working people have a huge tax burden, and perhaps a priority for a Conservative government would be to bring that down. But you say 3%, OK, only 3% of families of estates deal with this tax. But isn't that because there's the threat of inheritance tax? So a lot of people try to, move their assets around, sort it before they die. And also 30% of people seem to think they will pay this tax, particularly as assets are growing in value, housing in particular. So do you understand why it is so deeply unpopular?
I understand it to a certain extent, but the 30%, let's be clear, the 30% are wrong. Even the rising value of houses won't drag anything like that many people into the net. That's the first point. The second point is, yes, you're right, some people do avoid it, but it's not actually the sort of middle, well-off but not super rich people who avoid it. It's the very rich and the super rich who avoid it. And there are some genuine issues there. It would be better to have a tax which perhaps was slightly less burdensome on some upper middle income earners, but made it considerably harder for people at the top end to avoid paying it mostly or entirely, usually through the use of trusts or other forms of ways that you can quite legally, but in some ways unfairly, avoid the tax.
So, a couple of Tories said to me one of the arguments in favour of it for Tory MPs and perhaps Rishi Sunak, who, by the way, first advocated cutting inheritance tax in the first policy document, even before he was an MP back in 2014, is that it will be what we call clear blue water with the Labour Party, because there's absolutely no way Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and Keir Starmer are going to say, we'll have a bit of that.
Well, that may be. I mean, I'm not qualified to comment on the politics, but from a purely economic perspective, to take just one example, we have cut per pupil spending on sixth forms by 20% over the last 15 years. Now, the government claims that's because we didn't have enough tax revenue. We couldn't afford to even maintain what we were spending on our young people in schools. The idea that cutting inheritance tax, which will primarily, let's be clear who it will benefit. It would benefit me, right? I live in London. My parents live in London. The value of the properties occupied by my parents has soared over the past 30 years. I would get a very substantial benefit from the sorts of cuts that have been proposed. The idea that somebody like me is a higher priority than to properly fund the other thing which Richard Sunak says he wants, which is to teach maths properly in our schools, which I entirely agree with. But you don't do that unless you recruit and pay maths teachers, and we're not doing that at the moment. So it's simply a question of priorities.
But hang on, Jonathan, I think, we could talk about priorities, but if you look to other countries, I don't believe Australia has inheritance tax, or a death tax, you could call it. I don't believe social democracies like Norway and Sweden have one either. We are a bit of an outlier when it comes to these kind of taxes, and some people simply think it's immoral for, the government to take away what you want to pass on. They've already paid tax on it. It's one of those fundamental... Sorry, that's all we've got time for, Jonathan. Sorry about that. I just wanted to go over one there. Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan Fortis of the King's College London.
And, of course, that is the point they will make if they do it. They will say, how many countries have it? Not many. We've got to... Now, still to come. Hospital appointment cancellations are expected to surpass 1 million today. Why are the doctors going on strike then?
Well, yeah, we heard from Liam Fox. But first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
10:32 is the time. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. GB News can exclusively reveal armed officers or counter-terrorism officers in London have stepped back from duties amid an escalating crisis over their legal protection. It comes after a police officer was charged with murder over the shooting of an unarmed black man in South London last year. In addition, almost all armed response vehicles in the capital have handed in their firearms permits. Senior Met Police commanders are currently in crisis discussions to try to ensure London has an adequate level of protection. The military's been put on standby to respond in the event of a terrorist attack. The Mayor of Greater Manchester says the North shouldn't have to pay for the government's mismanagement of the HS2 budget. Rishi Sunak is refusing to guarantee the planned line between Birmingham to Manchester will be completed. He'll discuss its future with the Chancellor this week, with a decision expected before the Tory party conference. It's in Manchester next week. Mr Burnham believes the curtailing the project risks creating a north-south chasm, but Rishi Sunak insists he is committed to levelling up. The number of NHS appointments cancelled because of strikes in England is expected to surpass 1 million. NHS providers estimate the first ever double strike action by junior doctors and consultants last week means the country will reach the milestone in figures that will be announced today. The organisation's Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Cordery, has labelled it damaging and demoralising and says behind every day there is a real and human cost. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Today, the pound buys you $1.2223, €1.1498 euros, and gold will cost £1,573 and 17 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,626 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Someone's just sent me a very interesting table of inheritance tax around the world, which we will get to because it's very interesting. But still to come, hospital cancellations surpassing 1 million. We'll ask our panel, should patients suffer over these pay disputes?
Well, they are.
Well, they are, yeah, they are. This is Britain's Newsroom.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
It is 10:39 with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce, and I'm delighted to say with Emily Carper.
Yes, rather lovely. So, shall we have a look? Oh, we're going to emails. Fantastic.
Yes.
We've had so many coming through. Where should we go to? Inheritance tax?
Yeah, I think
Quite
we
a lot
should.
of people were irked by Jonathan Portis there a little bit.
Yeah, and
Bless
we didn't
him.
get the point to challenge him on how many countries have no inheritance tax at all.
But luckily, someone sent us... Sorry, I haven't actually checked your name. You sent us a table of all the countries and what rates of inheritance tax they pay. Belgium has a top rate of 80%.
Yeah. But
80%. But then there are lots of countries, aren't there,
Australia,
that have zero.
Australia 0, Canada 0, we don't count China, Estonia, Hungary, India, Israel, Luxembourg, Mexico, New Zealand, the list goes on. More countries have 0 than any other.
And a lot of people pointing out just the distress of having to deal with inheritance tax, dealing with revenue and customs, dealing with the tax man, essentially, when you've just lost a loved one, and all the stress that goes into that.
Italy's only 4%, Poland only 7%, Denmark 15%, and we're 40%.
I think it's an anti-aspiration tax.
It is.
You know, if I have children, I would want to keep hold of my assets saved so I can pass on something.
Yeah, of course you would, without the taxman getting his big share.
Or maybe I'll just
greedy
want to
hands.
spend it all. There's that too, isn't there?
Be warned.
Spend before I die, yes.
Yeah,
Let us know what side of that you're on. But yes, a lot of people saying it's the worst tax ever.
Yeah.
Unfair.
We don't know if it is going to be reformed, but we've got a Tory party conference coming up this weekend. I'll be there in Manchester, and it may well be one of the things he flags in his speech, Rishi Sunak, because he's spewing out policy ideas. Anybody would think they were 20 points behind in the polls.
I wonder what the mood's going to be like at Tory conference.
Bleak.
A bit bleak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, his first conference he's addressing as Prime Minister, because last year it was Liz Truss was still Prime Minister.
Of course it
during
was,
Tory
yes.
conference. It's when she famously abandoned her cutting the top rate of tax.
Oh, dear, oh, dear.
It was a very, very busy conference for me, let me tell you.
Shall we move on?
I think we should.
We should move on. Right.
Yeah.
Well, we have our wonderful panel with us.
In pink, a vision, Dawn Neeson.
Thank you very much.
And always a vision, Bushra Sheikh.
Morning, guys.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So, the top story, Mark White revealed this earlier, counter-terrorism officers have essentially put down their guns. They're stopping duty following the arrest over the Chris Cabba shooting. So what do you make of that, Dawn?
I think it's terrifying. I think it's very dangerous for everyone in London, and certainly it has the potential to spread throughout the country as well to other big cities. I feel terribly sorry for people that put themselves in the way of danger for no extra money, by the way. Armed response units do not get paid any extra money for risking their lives in this way.
Really?
Nope.
I did not know that.
No, they are paid exactly the same as ordinary police officers. So they don't get paid
Which isn't
any money.
enough.
Pardon?
Which isn't enough.
No, which isn't enough, by the way. And they put themselves in constant danger. I was interviewing a former armed response officer this morning, and he was involved in an incident where he nearly lost his life, and he went home and his little girl, she was 9 at the time, it's a few years ago, was waiting on the doorstep in tears because she thought her daddy had been killed. And they face that pressure every single day. And to go to work with the pressure hanging over you that you can end up in court charged with murder simply for doing your job.
Yeah.
I can't blame them for doing what they're doing.
Because we can't get into the reads of any case,
not. No,
but
absolutely.
you know that a police officer who makes that decision to fire the gun, it's a split-second decision. There's no willful intent to take a life.
No, of course
he
not.
or she is doing their job to the best of their abilities.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very rare. I mean, I think there's been twice recently where police have fired in London, and it is incredibly rare, and they don't do it lightly. They are incredibly well trained. And everyone's going, oh, it's so fine, we just bring the army into it. But it's completely different. The army are there to follow orders and take control. Police officers, armed response units, are incredibly well trained to deal with situations, unlike the army.
Yeah, it's not just a swap. It's not a like for like.
It's incredibly dangerous.
And these are counter-terrorism officers that have withdrawn their effective their labour. They're effectively, Bush, they've gone on strike.
Yeah, they have, and this is really crucial, and it's important to understand that we can't have this spreading across the country. I'm an avid supporter of our officers being armed, whether that's police officers and the army. So this case is crucial because they've obviously given up their arms, because at the end of the day, if they are facing their own danger, but that could also result in them being charged with murder and then being imprisoned, I can understand why they would give up the arms, you know.
How do they get round the dilemma, though, Bushra? Because equally, citizens going about their daily lives have to be assured that they are going to be protected from officers who sometimes get it wrong.
Absolutely. The thing is, these armed officers haven't just got arms for no reason. Like Dawn said, they are exceptionally trained. They're not out there just to commit atrocities like murder. You know, they are responsible officers. So this case is certainly interesting to me because on one hand, you do have the victims and their families to understand what went on, what happened, and that's their duty and their right to ask those questions. But it's also really important for us as a country to know that it is crucial for our officers, especially the terrorism officers, to be armed. I mean, they have to be.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we did ask Liam Fox earlier whether perhaps it was irresponsible of these officers to put down their arms, and someone's got in touch with me, a former AFO for 8 years. He says, you're wrong to say it's irresponsible of them to surrender their permits. Carrying a firearm is voluntary, cannot be compulsory. They're well within their rights to refuse to carry.
They are, but what they've done is denude the capital city, which is always a potential terror target.
Yes.
We don't know how many terror attacks are foiled every week, every month.
It's
it makes me feel this city's not so safe.
It isn't safe, and it's an incredibly dangerous situation. We rely on these people far more than we know, because so much of the work they do, we never get to hear about.
I know.
And I'm just wondering, you know, your other place of work, Andrew, sort of like, you know, the Parliament. I mean, what's happening there? I mean, are they still being protected by armed response units? I mean, I don't know.
I know. Well, yeah, I mean, and you think outside Number 10, outside Tony Blair's house, wherever he goes, he's got armed officers with him.
So it's very, very dangerous for our politicians as well. And, you know, we've lost, you know, Joe Cox and David Amess. I mean, so it is incredibly dangerous for them. And what are the officers who are protecting them now going to do? You're armed with someone with a knife or with a gun themselves, and you've got truncheon?
Yeah.
Well, let's hope this is resolved.
Well, you just very briefly on that. Keith Palmer was the police officer standing on guard outside the Palace of Westminster Parliament, and he was repeatedly stabbed because there was no armed police officer at that particular entrance to Parliament, and he was stabbed to death. And the bloke who killed him was shot dead by a minister's driver who was armed. And it was the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon.
And we could potentially be in that situation.
Yeah.
Can't help but think constant bashing the police get.
They do a great job.
Over institutional problems.
Yeah, but they do a great job.
But they do, by and large, do a great job. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Should we move on to The Express? Because The Express is reporting on page 19 that 400,000 patients are spending the entire day, i.e. 24 hours, in A&E waiting to see someone. Who wants to go on this?
I mean, firstly, for me, this is insane. I know accident and emergency is crucial. It's important. People want to go there and they want to be seen. I mean, the numbers are, they're saying around 400,000 patients. That's a huge number. And one of the things that Dawn and I were discussing is do people actually know when something's an actual emergency?
Yeah, and if it's an emergency, why are they there all day?
Yeah,
because it can't be an emergency.
Well, it's not. So I think this is about educating yourself about symptoms of things. You perhaps don't need to take yourself to A&E and wait there all day.
Yeah, because if you can sit there all day, Dawn, you assume for 24 hours it's not that critical a medical emergency, is it?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people...
to be unkind to the 400,000 people.
You are being a bit unkind.
A little unkind, but...
you know, this could just be a symptom of an NHS that simply is not working rather than the patient's fault.
It's a legitimate point, isn't it? Too many people go to A&E because they can't get to a GP.
Well, that's the point I was going to make, Andrew. I mean, I was unlucky enough to break my shoulder, fracture my shoulder, and I couldn't get to see a GP. I couldn't get to see anyone medically qualified, so I had to go to A&E. I mean, I wasn't sick. I think I was only there about 4 or 5 hours, so it wasn't the end of the world. But you know, it wasn't an emergency. I wasn't going to die.
You're probably
but
in a lot
it was
of
quite
pain.
painful, and there was no one else I could see.
No.
Do you know where I had a good experience? Bournemouth Hospital.
Oh.
I had an e-scooter accident.
Don't start.
They saw me very quickly. Yes,
they
should be banned. They should be banned after that.
But that's another story.
What I was going to add is we've got a rising number of cases where people are suffering from a lot of anxiety, just in general, with life. So I think that's... I was reading some stats about it, and I think a lot of people can't determine... You know, they think they're having some kind of heart attack or something, and they're taking themselves to A&E when it's just anxiety. So we have a rising at the number. And then when they're calling 111, they're saying, I can't breathe, and they're, you know, giving these these scary symptoms, and they're saying, take yourself to A&E. So this is the sort of culmination of the lacking of GP appointments and anxiety, and then we're just getting a rise of them waiting around because they just want to be seen.
Yeah. Why was Bournemouth Hospital so good then?
Well, they just saw me very quickly, and they had GB News playing in the waiting room.
Marvellous. Can I just clarify, were you on the scooter or were you hit by a scooter?
I was on the scooter and I did not control the scooter very well, and I crashed into a... not a wall, but a...
Well, at least you didn't crash into a person.
Well, exactly.
That's better. Sorry for the wall. And
And
it
no,
might have made your injuries more.
I had not been drinking.
Yeah.
I was not scooting and drinking.
I've got a big problem about those scooters because they're silent, they're not licensed, they don't have number plates, and they go too fast.
They can go up to... there is a speed limit on them, supposedly, but they can go up to 65 miles an hour.
I agree.
You can actually buy the ones that go 65 miles an hour. And they're allowed on cycle lane and I'm cycling.
And they're a mugger's charter because they can come up behind you, whack.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bushra? I know we've digressed terribly.
What, about the scooters?
Yeah, the scooters. I think they're a menace.
No, I don't. I think it's quite
nifty.
No, I haven't got one. I mean, my kids used to have one until I realised that they started blowing up at home, and then I got really frightened.
Yes, that's the other point. Yes,
that was in the news.
That's killed people. They burnt houses down.
They were burning houses. Literally, I thought, OK, I'm not even going to take the risk. I'm going to get rid of them. And I had 2 of them, and I got absolutely rid of them. And, yeah, I don't...
oh, my goodness.
I don't endorse the scooters, the electric ones.
Good. Well, I don't like
Yeah, you've got, you know, 2 students going on them at the same time on one scoot.
Did you abandon it now, your scooter? What have you done?
Well, it wasn't mine. I just rented it, you know. They just have them there. You put your phone on it and you take it away.
Yeah.
So, do we have time for another story?
We do.
What should we go to? Jill Dando? No?
Can't believe it. Well, Dawn and I are old enough.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
Well, it's true. 23 years. Can you believe it?
No, I can't believe it. And I was lucky enough to interview Jill Dando several times as well. And she was lovely. She really was lovely.
Just remind people who she was, Dawn.
She was a Crime Watch presenter. She was a BBC journalist and she was a Crime Watch presenter. And obviously this happened in 1999. She was assassinated literally on her doorstep in West London. And it was utterly shocking. I think I'd interviewed her, Andrew, literally a week, maybe a couple of weeks before.
Really?
And we got on really well.
Terribly nice woman, wasn't she?
She was lovely. She was absolutely... I was utterly shocked by the whole thing. And I'm still utterly shocked. Now, this story is about the new Netflix show, which is going out. And could her assassin finally be found? As we know, there was a wrongful conviction of... what was his name?
Yes. I'll Google him while you're
sorry. There was a wrongful arrest and conviction and someone who had learning difficulties.
Yeah.
And now they are re-investigating the case. They are talking to someone who was serving time in prison and they think they've unearthed new
it was Barry George.
Barry George, thank you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
The thing is, Andrew, I've been reading about this, and there doesn't seem to be anything new in it.
No.
At the time, there were all these theories about, obviously, she presented Crime Watch, she upset a lot of underworld figures.
Yeah.
There was a Serbian hit.
Serbian connection.
Yeah, absolutely, because she'd done some work with Kosovan refugees. And also the Kenneth Noy. Do you remember Kenneth Noy?
I do.
The M25 murder, road rage murder.
Yeah.
He served time for that, and one of the main reasons...
There's big drama about him, I'll tell you very recently.
One of the main reasons he went down was Giordando's Crime Watch.
Yeah.
And he was a cold-blooded killer, and so there is lots of speculation.
Yeah, he was the Brinksmat man, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, yes.
Do you know, does she ring...
Yes, totally. I mean,
really?
when that story, when that happened, I was about 16 years old, and I just recall it being everywhere.
It was.
I mean, ultimately, for me, this is about families getting closure. And when something like that happens, there's just a part of you that really wants to know who did this to my child, who did this to my sibling. And I think having a Netflix documentary about it, which is coming out tomorrow, could certainly help with finding out who it was. So I think, you know, there potentially could be something positive.
Was the case closed?
It's still open.
It's still open, so people are still... Right, and this is going to up the ante.
She had a fiancé who was a very distinguished gynaecologist,
Yes,
Alan
that's
Farthing.
right.
Didn't he deliver some of the royal babies?
Yes, he did, yeah, absolutely.
So this story had everything. She was a household name, she was very popular.
Yeah.
And she was a brave woman by presenting Crime Watch, but none of us ever thought her life would be at risk.
Well, no. I mean, she did. Well, but when I interviewed, she did mention, because I asked that question. It's an obvious question. You know, you do actually send a lot of people down. Aren't you worried about, you know, your own safety?
You asked her that.
And she said yes, but if she doesn't think about it too much, then obviously a couple of weeks later...
Absolutely fascinating. I'm sure many of us will be tuning into that Netflix series.
Yeah.
But in the next few moments, thank you very much. Fantastic.
They'll be back.
They'll be back later.
Good.
But in the next few moments, we'll be joined by Mark White again, our Home and Security editor, who is live from the island of Lampedusa. The global migrant crisis is worsening there.
And the counter-terrorism officers are laying down their arms in London, which is a very deeply worrying moment. We are GB News. We're Britain's newsroom on GB News. That's Emily
On
Carver.
Britain's news channel.
And I'm Andrew Pierce.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, we will see some sunnier and brighter moments, but watch out for Wednesday. Could turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now, lots of sunshine out there actually across parts of England and Wales. Still maybe a little bit of overnight rain and cloud just to clear the very far southeast, but for most of us really, it's a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing the main bulk of the showers, and some of these could potentially be quite heavy, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, and still quite windy here. That will temper the temperatures somewhat, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs reaching 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, a lot of England and Wales remaining dry. Still the risk of some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially across more western areas. Elsewhere, under the clear skies, we could see some mist and fog also forming. And then later on in the night, just starting to potentially see some heavy showers working in across the very far south coast of England. A mild night for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in double figures. So these showers will then track their way northwards across parts of England as we go through the course of the morning. Elsewhere, once any early mist and fog clears, briefly drier and brighter, but then further bands of rain moving in from the west, which will be accompanied again by some fairly strong winds, heaviest of the rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But despite the wind, it's going to be another fairly mild one. Temperatures high teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
In just one moment, we'll be going live to Mark White, our Home and Security editor. He's in Lampedusa, the Italian port there, and we'll also be getting the very latest on what's going on in the Met Police. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock on Monday, the 25th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Emily Carr. And as Europe's migrant crisis worsens, our Home and Security Editor Mark White is live on the front line in Lampedusa.
I'm here on the Italian island of Lampedusa, where more than 11,000 migrants have arrived here in the past week. Many of those, of course, will end up in northwestern France, trying to get to the UK.
London at risk. GB News learns all counter-terrorism Met firearms officers have stepped back in protest at the charging of one other colleague with murder. Crisis talks are underway.
Two thin ladies. Bingo goes politically correct with calls for traditional language such as one little duck to be consigned to history.
What?
Legs 11, clickety-click 66.
Two fat ladies.
Two fat ladies.
Two fat ladies. I didn't know that was coming up. That's...
Yeah, no, well,
Can't believe it.
Surprise here on TV. Emily's obviously not a bingo player, but I have been known to play bingo in my time, but it was a very long time
I
ago.
can see that. Now, we'd love to know what you think about that and everything else. Get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.com or tweet us at gbnews. But first, the news with Aaron.
Good morning to you. It's a minute past 11. Aaron Armstrong here
In the newsroom, GB News has learned a significant number of armed counter-terrorism officers in London have stepped back from duties amid an escalating crisis over their legal protection. It comes after a colleague was charged with murder over the shooting of an unarmed black man in South London last year. Almost all armed response vehicles in the capital have also handed in their firearms permits. Senior Met Police commanders are currently in crisis discussions to try to ensure London has an adequate level of protection. The military has been put on standby to respond in the event of a terror attack. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth says people need confidence in the police.
It's vital that they have support, but there are also safeguards in place. Now, there's been a review announced by the Home Secretary. We don't know the details of that review yet. There's also that live prosecution, that court case. So I want, as a politician, to be careful about how I comment on these matters, as you would appreciate. But we obviously need to make sure we have procedures in place which commands the confidence of both the police officers and the communities they serve.
The Mayor of Greater Manchester says the North shouldn't have to pay for the government's mismanagement of the HS2 budget. Rishi Sunak is refusing to guarantee the planned line between Birmingham to Manchester. He'll discuss its future with the Chancellor this week, with a decision expected before the Tory party conference in the city next week. Mr Burnham believes curtailing the project risks creating a north-south chasm, but the Prime Minister insists he is committed to levelling up.
This kind of speculation that people are, making is not right. I mean, we've got spades in the ground, we're getting on and delivering, but across the north, what we're also doing is connecting up all the towns and cities in the north, east to west. That's a really important part of how we will create jobs, drive growth across the region, all part of our plans to level up. Free ports are another good example of that, whether that's in Teesside or elsewhere, attracting new investment, new businesses coming in, all good examples of the government levelling up.
The Home Secretary is set to call for unity amongst Western leaders to combat the global migration crisis. Suella Braverman will tell an audience in Washington that other countries can learn from the UK's innovative attempts to tackle illegal migrants. She's questioning whether conventions and legal frameworks designed more than 50 years ago are still fit for purpose, and is calling for a shake-up of the international rules. The number of NHS appointments cancelled because of strikes in England is expected to surpass 1 million. NHS providers estimate the first double strike action by junior doctors and consultants last week means the country will reach that milestone in figures set to be announced today. The organisation's Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Cordery, has labelled it damaging and demoralising. And it comes as new figures show almost 400,000 patients waited 24 hours or more in A&E last year in England. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine is calling the situation a matter of national shame. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says 24 hours in A&E is no longer just a documentary. But the Department of Health and Social Care says NHS recovery plan is bringing improvements. Prosecutors are seeking a retrial of Lucy Leppi on one count of attempted murder. The former nurse was jailed for life last month for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others at a hospital in Chester in 2015 and 2016. Jurors were unable to reach a verdict on 6 further counts of attempted murder. The CPS is now seeking a retrial on count 14 only. That relates to the attempted murder of child K. She denies the charges and has launched an appeal. Experts are warning the government won't meet its manifesto pledge to end homelessness by next year. The Kerslake Commission says there are chronic and unresolved issues in the housing system, with a crisis pushing more people onto the streets. The number of people sleeping rough last autumn was 25% higher than the same time 3 years ago. The government says it's spending £2 billion to end rough sleeping for good. Police searching for a missing mother have arrested a 31-year-old woman who attended an East London police station. The woman was also taken to hospital as a precaution. 2 children were reported missing from a centre for vulnerable mothers and children. Well, they were found in London safe and well. That was in Harwich earlier today. Officers were looking for 31-year-old Jamie Lee Kelly, who left the facility on Tuesday with her 3-year-old daughter and newborn baby boy. On TV, on digital radio, and you can just say play GB News to get us on your smart speaker too. That's it. Now back to Andrew and Emily.
Well, breaking news, GBNews has learned every Met Police counter-terrorism firearms officer has stepped back from duty after one of their colleagues was charged with murder.
Yes, crisis talks are underway. The Army is on standby to patrol the streets if needed.
So our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who broke the story, he's in Lampedusa covering the migrant crisis. We're going to go to him live. Mark, I think this is probably unprecedented, isn't it?
It's certainly a significant crisis for the Metropolitan Police. I should say that Scotland Yard have put out a statement in the last few minutes denying that every counter-terrorism specialist firearms officer has stepped back from duty. They say that there are some that are still on duty, but the information that we have received is at the very least that a very significant number of these counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers have stepped back from duty. A source had said it was everyone bar 5 who were on annual leave. Now that may have changed since our source got that information. What is true is the Metropolitan Police senior managers are in crisis talks with armed officers to try to ensure that those who've handed in what they call a blue ticket, which is effectively a ticket that gives them authorisation to carry lethal force, to carry firearms, they've handed in, they've stepped back in protest. What was a development last week in the prosecution of one of their number, an officer known only as NX121, who's been charged with the murder of Chris Kaba in London on the 5th of September last year. He was driving a car that was linked to gun crime. It was pulled over by armed police officers, and in the operation to detain Mr. Kaba, one of those officers discharged his weapon and Chris Kaba was struck in the head and died in hospital in the early hours of the following morning. The decision, as I say, to prosecute that officer, a controversial decision that many firearms officers believes changes the picture in terms of the way in which armed incidents are assessed going forward. They believe that they're not getting the support that they deserve from senior managers within the Metropolitan Police. They feel that these split-second decisions that they often make in the most difficult of circumstances can be analysed forensically many years after the event, and they may well find themselves in court facing serious charges. So they're very concerned going forward, and that's why many of these officers have decided to embark on what they call a period of reflection, effectively handing in their firearms certificates until they can get a satisfactory response from the Metropolitan Police. And we know that the Home Secretary, who's issued support to firearms officers, has now embarked or launched an urgent review into armed policing, I guess to look at the way in which these decisions are made and assessed after the fact.
Mark, you are in Lampedusa, which has been called, well, now the heart of Europe's migrant surge. I think most people watching will want to know, 11,000 people have crossed to this island in the last week or so. Does this mean that we could see a surge in channel crossings too as a result?
Yeah.
Almost certainly, because we have seen throughout the period that we've had a migrant crisis that many of those who land on Europe's southern shores work their way up. Not all of them are headed to the UK. Many of them are headed to Germany or France, other more prosperous northern European countries. But yes, many of them want to get to the UK. So if we see a surge, as we've been seeing in Italy, with more than 130,000 crossing this year so far, which is more than double the number who crossed at this period last year, then yes, that is likely to feed through on those that find themselves in these migrant camps around Dunkirk, around Calais, and further south around Boulogne.
Our Home and Security Editor in Lampedusa. Mark, thanks for joining us, and who, of course, will keep us up to date on that ongoing crisis in the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah, we talk about prosperous Northern European countries. How long will we be prosperous?
Well, politically, if they don't get to grips with this migrant crisis, they're doomed, the Tories.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can go on as much as they like about the fact that Keir Starmer's policy of, burden sharing could lead to 100,000 coming in. Well, the Tories have had years to get to grips with it. They're trying to get it sorted out with sending people to Rwanda, but I'd have no faith they're going to get it sorted out.
Yeah.
Look at it. It's just appalling.
Yeah, Europe has a choice, really, don't they?
They do.
What are they going to do? Anyway, they were defined by their Stop Brexit stance 4 years ago, but have they changed their tune? I'm talking about the Liberal Democrats. We'll be joined by Tom Harwood, our Deputy Political Editor, live from the Liberal Democrat Conference. Exciting.
In Bournemouth. I so wish I could have been there with him.
You're with Britain's Newsroom.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family. GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:16 with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner and...
No, with Emily Carver.
Emily Carver.
Goodness me.
Slip, and delighted it is you too, Emily. And I know you can't this excitement has been building since we said we're going to the Liberal Democrat conference in Bournemouth. Tom Harwood, who's our Deputy Political Editor, he's there right now. Tom, are you overwhelmed with excitement?
Oh, it is delightful to be here in sunny Bournemouth, Andrew, because this is the event of the year, really, the Liberal Democrat Party conference. I have to say it's a particular delight for me in my new role as Deputy Political Editor at GB News. It's the first Liberal Democrat conference I've ever been to. I've been to the Labour and the Tory conferences for years and years and years now, but this is a special treat because the Liberal Democrats pride themselves on being internally democratic. That means there can be some real rows on the floor of the conference, and it means that we can see Liberal Democrat activists actually really going at each other on policy. That's the heart of the Lib Dem conference, and to some extent what happens on the floor at this conference is more interesting than what happens on the floor at the Tory or the Labour conferences.
You've really sold it to us there, Tom. I think everyone is now actually very genuinely excited. So what kind of fighting could we see? What policies are the sticking points this year?
There's a real sticking point between the leadership of the Liberal Democrats and the membership of the Liberal Democrats on the issue of Brexit. Generally what we see with the membership of the Lib Dems, which grew, of course, during the Brexit years when they adopted, I'm not sure if I can say this at this time in the morning on daytime television, but they adopted a slogan, bollocks to Brexit, as an official Liberal Democrats Party slogan. That attracted a lot of radical pro-EU activists to the party, but now the leadership going after lots of seats that are held by the Conservatives, going after lots of seats that voted leave in the EU referendum. The leadership doesn't want to talk about rejoining the EU, but the membership, elements of the membership really do want to talk about that. So there's this tension that is existing throughout this conference, and indeed several motions, whether it be on the single market or even further integration with the European Union, creating some perhaps tension there between the leadership and the membership.
Of course, Tom, just before we let you go to the exciting debates there, of course, Jo Swinson, who was the short-lived Lib Dem leader in the last general election, she had a disastrous policy, in my view. If you vote Lib Dem or in government, effectively, that was the end of Brexit. Not only did the Lib Dems do very badly, she lost her seat, of course.
She did, and it was a remarkable policy for a party that had Democrats in the name of it to be advocating not a second referendum, but simply cancel the whole thing altogether. I think that was no doubt one of the reasons why the Lib Dems didn't do as well as they thought they would in 2019. If we remember back to the start of that election, the Lib Dems were putting out leaflets with Jo Swinson's face on them saying Britain's next Prime Minister. There was a time that the Lib Dems were vying around the same level as the other three parties at the time, Brexit Party included, all vying around 25% of the vote. But of course, things massively changed over the summer of 2019 leading up to that December election. It was a remarkable time in politics, and although now we've sort of moved away from that time where everything seemed so up in the air, what we're seeing is a very different strategy from the Liberal Democrats at the moment. They're not pretending that Ed Davey is going to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But what they are hinting at is potentially deals to be done with the Labour Party. We're seeing reports this morning that they would put a green belt protection policy at the heart of any potential coalition or deal talks with Sir Keir Starmer. And we're also seeing from the leadership of the Liberal Democrats that they're not talking about collecting the largest votes possible across the country, as perhaps they might have done in the past. They're looking at a very targeted strategy of certain seats where they'll send in lots and lots of resources, lots and lots of activists to not get the highest national vote share, but instead to get the highest number of seats that they possibly can.
Right, that's Tom Harwood, who's excited for his first Liberal Democrat conference, our Deputy Speaker. Tom, thanks for joining us, and we'll be speaking to him again, I'm sure, this week.
I don't understand why they don't just say we're the party of rejoining the European Union. Well, because otherwise, what sets them apart? Well, apart from blocking housing?
John Oxley's here, political commentator. Why don't they, John? Because he is, Tom's right, he's ducking and diving the leader here, Ed Davey.
He absolutely is. I think this is partly, he has a problem, like Tom was saying. You've got a lot of these activists, and let's face it, a conference, it's not just activists, it's the keenest ones, because, why go to the Lib Dem conference when you could have a few days on holiday somewhere?
Yeah.
and they are very keen on reversing Brexit. But Ed Davey, he wants to have a broad appeal. We've got a public who, even if they lean Remain or even think about rejoining, are kind of sick of talking about Brexit. And he's particularly going to be trying to target a lot of Tory Lib Dem marginal seats, maybe trying to appeal to some people who even voted for Brexit. So getting bogged down in that is a bit of a political dead end for him. We saw 4 years ago it didn't work for the party. They don't want to run that again and end up where they are at the moment with a dozen seats or so.
Tom talking about talk of coalition with Labour, of course. Coalition is seared on him because Ed Davey was in the coalition government. He lost his... Did he not lose his seat, I think, in 2015 and then came back in the 2017 election?
Yes, he was part of that wave of Lib Dems who saw their vote share drop, particularly, there's him, there was people like Vince Cable in sort of outer London and sort of some of the home county seats, where the Lib Dems really suffered. And so it's part of their way back is to win a lot of those seats that they did lose in 2015, and they're going to be thinking about how they do that, particularly seats, say, in the West Country, where they are big Tory Lib Dem marginals, and they want to profit from the Tories being unpopular.
If Labour don't win an outright majority at the next general election, and there is talk of a coalition of sorts, do you think Labour would have to offer the Liberal Democrats much? Do you think they'd be, keen to get in power, whatever?
I think it depends where the numbers finish up. I mean, say you get into a position where you've got 40 or 50 Lib Dem MPs and the Labour Party are short of a majority by that much, then, the Lib Dems are in a good position to, potentially try and force another election. But if Labour do slightly better than that, and they can be in the position of saying, actually, you know what, if you stop our key legislation, we're just going to have another election and we're going to say, vote with us to keep the Tories out. It puts Lib Dems in a really difficult position.
You see, I don't think they'd go into a formal coalition like they did in 2010, 2015. They'd have an arrangement whereby they say, we will support you on as many measures as we can. Do you think that would be more likely?
I think that's far more likely. So what in technical terms is called a confidence and supply motion, which is basically when you have a budget that has to clear the House, we will back that. Anything that's a sort of confidence issue, we will support you on, but everything else we will take a view on. But it also becomes very interesting for the Lib Dems internally if you get in that position, because it becomes a whipping operation. If you have 50 MPs, are they all going to take the line on everything, or is it going to split? And potentially some of the fights you're seeing at conference will play through to that, because they are a party that's divided on a lot of issues and likes saying different things to different groups of voters, and that becomes very hard to manage with a parliamentary party when it comes down to it and you're voting in the lobbies.
They really do so, and no more so than when it comes to the issue of housing. There's a bit of a conflict there between some members of the Liberal Democrats and their younger members, who, of course, are desperate for more housing. But the Lib Dems, they do well in local seats by saying, you know what, we'll stand against that infrastructure project, we'll stand against those ugly housing blocks.
And I think they're also one of the few parties that are clear on what they're going to do on HS2.
Yes, so that's one of the things that we've been seeing in the last few days. The Tories have been very confused. Labour seem to have been as confused. Whereas, the Lib Dems, they're at least sticking to a hymn sheet on one thing. So
can they say they're going to go? They want to carry on with it.
They want to carry on with it. They're sort of, we've invested so much so far, we will plough on. But again, that starts to cause them issues. Chesham and Amersham is one of those seats they won a by-election that is bang on the route, but not one of those seats that really feel we see the disruption, we don't see any of the benefits.
And they attacked HS2 in the Chesham and Amersham by-election, which they won on a massive swing, and yet here they are nationally saying, we'll support it. It's a classic. They say one thing locally to whoever who's listening and another in a different part of the country.
Really, in 2010, that was when they got caught out. They went into a government with the Conservatives and they had to start adopting positions on that. And I think it'll be the same position, particularly around housing, for example. Say there is a Labour minority government, they're going to come in with some bold, ambitious housing plans. They're going to look to the Lib Dems to support those, but you're going to be in a position where you've got a lot of Lib Dem MPs who say, well, I won on here because I said no building in the constituency, no building on the green belt. Why would I throw myself under the bus to vote for this? So it's one of those things that it wins as an electoral strategy, but at a certain point you're called to the push. And, you saw in 2015, they lost 40, 50 seats. They went from being a big force in politics to being really on the fringes. Potentially they could come back again, but does it lead to these sort of decisions?
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. John Oxley there, political commentator.
Very much.
Mostly on the Liberal Democrat conference.
And, of course, we've got the big event tomorrow, John. We didn't ask about that.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's the leader's speech tomorrow.
Absolutely, which everyone, I'm sure, will have blocked out some time in their calendar to watch.
And he's already said, what time does it start? What time does it finish? Will we be taking a live feed? We won't be taking a live feed, I'm pretty sure.
It's the big match atmosphere. Everyone will get their beers and snacks in, ready for Ed Davies' big speech, I'm sure.
I do like their little stunts, though.
Yeah.
Their little stunts, their little cannon.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things.
This hammer, the wall that they're demolishing, the blue wall that they're demolishing.
John's not so convinced. He says, Sir Ed Davey can't answer a question. Will you take us back into the EU? Round and round and round we go. No answer comes. We still don't know. Oh, there's the cannon.
There's the cannon, yeah.
They all look very pleased.
Yeah.
Very, very pleased to be Liberal Democrats. Yeah. I just don't understand. I just don't see where the Liberal Democrats set themselves apart from any other party unless they decide to adopt a, an unashamed pro-European Union position.
He's absolutely not going to do that because...
But why not? Because Labour isn't.
Because he wants to get some Tory voters who might have voted Brexit last time. So he's sitting on the fence.
He's sitting on the fence. We're so used to our politicians sitting on the fence.
Surely
Rishi Sunak is starting to say some more, which is pushing Keir Starmer to start to reveal more. So there you go.
Exactly. We've got some emails, haven't we? I haven't managed to open
We do actually have lots of emails.
I'm going to let you read
on
them.
On the police, on the armed officers. We've got some interesting ones. Yes, someone's written in who was an AFO for 10 years between the middle of the 70s to the mid-80s. He says, we were all aware that we had to make life or death decisions that affected us or the criminal in the time it takes to snap your fingers. Consequently, when I was arrested serious criminals at gunpoint, I relied on the information we received before deploying to our target. It's a very tense situation, I can assure you. I was lucky I was not shot, nor did I shoot to kill as was required. Well, that just shows just how difficult these decisions are and how important it is to have these officers, these trained officers, working.
It's an impossible job, isn't it? Because they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And, of course, these counter-terrorism officers have withdrawn their arms, a large number of them, not all of them, but equally the police cannot, the public have to feel they're going to be protected from armed police officers who may make the wrong decision.
Yeah, and Dennis says, before apportioning blame on an officer and charging him, perhaps the finger of blame should be with Theresa May for cutting the police force by 20,000.
She did.
I mean, they do say they've got made up those 20,000 now, but not enough,
a lot of the people who left were experienced police officers. And what the new ones, obviously, the 20,000 that have come in, by definition, they're inexperienced. They're inexperienced.
Yeah.
And you can't afford to lose experienced police. So she went to the Police Federation and said, you're bluffing, we don't need as many, you can lose the numbers. And it was a terrible thing for a Tory Prime Minister to do.
I mean, just terrible. A feeling of safety as well. When you see a Bobby on the beat, as it were, you do feel more safe.
When do you see one of those, then?
Not very often. Oh. Certainly not in some parts of London. Beverly says police should be protected and backed up. Why else would they join the service? I think that is a really, really important point. As much as they need to be accountable, they also need to be supported and respected, in my view.
And they don't feel like they are being supported over this case.
No, absolutely not. We'll see how long this goes on for. We'll be getting the very latest from Mark White throughout the day, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
But still to come is the classic bingo call, two fat ladies, offensive. Should it be scrapped even?
No.
Here's the news with Aaron.
Very good morning to you. It's 11:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. GB News has learned a significant number of armed counter-terrorism officers in London have stepped back from duties amid an escalating crisis over their legal protection. It comes after a colleague was charged with murder over the shooting of Chris Kaba, an unarmed black man in South London last year. Almost all armed response vehicles in the capital have also handed in their firearms permits. Senior Met Police commanders are currently in crisis discussions to try to ensure London has an adequate level of protection. The military's been put on standby to respond in the event of a terrorist attack. Rishi Sunak's refused to guarantee the completion of HS2, but insists he is committed to levelling up. The government claim a decision hasn't been taken yet, despite mounting speculation the Birmingham to Manchester leg is to be scrapped amid spiralling costs. A decision's expected before the Tory party conference next week. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, believes curtailing the project risks creating a north-south chasm. The planned line to East Midlands Parkway is also under threat. NHS strikes are thought to have led to the cancellation of more than 1 million appointments since December. Figures due to be released later are expected to confirm the milestone in the wake of last week's double strike by junior doctors and consultants. Further disruption is expected again next week when the same groups walk out. Health leaders say there is a human cost for every cancellation, which is damaging and demoralising. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of the markets today. The pound buys you $1.2230, €1.1498 euros, and gold will cost £1,572 per ounce plus 89 pence, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,640 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Well, 1 in 4 people think the classic bingo call, two fat ladies, is offensive and should be scrapped. Do they have a point or are they overly sensitive? They're overly sensitive. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, we will see some sunnier and brighter moments, but watch out for Wednesday. Could turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now, lots of sunshine out there actually across parts of England and Wales. Still maybe a little bit of overnight rain and cloud just to clear the very far southeast, but for most of us really, it's a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing the main bulk of the showers, and some of these could potentially be quite heavy, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, and still quite windy here. That will temper the temperatures somewhat, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs reaching 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, a lot of England and Wales remaining dry. Still the risk of some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially across more western areas. Elsewhere, under the clear skies, we could see some mist and fog also forming. And then later on in the night, just starting to potentially see some heavy showers working in across the very far south coast of England. A mild night for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in double figures. So these showers will then track their way northwards across parts of England as we go through the course of the morning. Elsewhere, once any early mist and fog clears, briefly drier and brighter, but then further bands of rain moving in from the west, which will be accompanied again by some fairly strong winds, heaviest of the rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But despite the wind, it's going to be another fairly mild one. Temperatures high teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It is 11:38 even. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Emily Carver.
You are indeed. 15 unaccompanied child migrants were found to be adults, according to The Sun. Well, I guess this is the story we're going to with our panel. Former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, is with us, and Bushra Sheikh.
Bushra Sheikh, yeah. And we're also desperate to know their views on bingo call signs.
Let's go to that first. So, apparently bingo is joining the 21st century because woke millennials are ditching traditional calls such as two fat ladies, which of course is 88.
Why don't they just don't play bingo?
Just don't play bingo. Just go and do something really boring instead. I love bingo.
Go
What's
and do
wrong
some
with
tapestry.
Yeah, so pretty much, if you remember from our childhood back in 1878, Andrew.
Yeah, no, yours was slightly further ago than mine.
but
how ungallant of me.
Pretty much every number you play in bingo, and I used to love going to bingo with my nan and granddad. Pretty much every number has something fun and saucy.
Yeah, it did.
Legs 11, for example.
That's right.
You know, I mean, everything has something connected to it. I mean, just call out the number then.
Yeah, and make it boring.
This is the fun police. They're sucking all fun out of life, aren't they?
Bushra Simon's written in, he says, on the subject of bingo calls for the number 88, two body-positive Lizzos doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
No, it doesn't.
We like that person. Send in more emails.
It's almost like we have a generation of youngsters who are just offended by everything around them.
Right, Bushra, well said.
Are they really?
They, of course, they are.
Is someone being offended on their behalf? I mean,
maybe. Do they even know what a game of bingo is?
Yeah, well, my niece does. Yeah, because she's East End family, so she knows what a game of bingo is. She's 25. She's not offended.
When we were in the caravan, Weymouth, Ramsgate, down the pier, or along the pier, probably my better grammar, we'd play a game of bingo, and it was great.
But that was prize bingo, wasn't it?
Yeah, I won a tin of biscuits, a hammer for my dad,
And that was a weird combination of the biscuits and a hammer.
Yes, it was really.
We won a set of saucepans, which is completely useless for me, by the way. I wouldn't know what to do with them.
Did you ever use them?
No.
Have you ever used them since?
No.
Do you ever use
They
saucepans?
fell apart. They were the real cheap and nasty ones where you tried to put anything in them and the handle just fell off.
What I was trying to get to was who does the cooking in her house.
Well, not me. Darling, there are restaurants.
Well, Dawn, now people play bingo online, don't they? So they, there's a whole online industry and apps and stuff on their phone, and you can play with people all over the world. So it's just not a.
Did you ever play it?
You know, I did. I didn't go to actually go for bingo, but I had bingo at home. So I used to play with the children, and we used to get together with family, and we used to put like a bet. We saw bets on bingo and who would win, and so it was
Bushra, but that's banned now because it's encouraging children to get into gambling. You can't play toy bingo at home.
Oh,
what are you thinking?
You know what? I don't think these millennials are actually offended. I think it's a bit of a power play. You know, we're the good guys. A way to control the older generations, maybe.
Yeah,
Tell them that they're offensive all the time.
We're not succeeding with Dawn Newsom.
Good luck with that one.
Talking of the older generation.
Oh, my God.
Much older generation.
There is so much old nonsense going on here. But shall we move on to another story? Right.
Yes.
We have in The Sun, 15 unaccompanied child migrants in the care of the council were found to be adults.
Funny that. And how many times has that happened? Loads.
I'm absolutely shocked. You know, the ones with the beards and the Adam's apples and sort of like 6 foot tall and all right,
exactly.
I'm a child. I mean, you know, why do we think? Why are we even surprised by this?
I'm not.
Why are we surprised? It's like, and there are 15 child migrants. There's more than 15.
There's hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah. Well, how many stories have we had over the years where there's been a big hairy blokes in class with a load of 15-year-olds, and the kids are going, it's a bloke, it's an adult.
I know, but also some of these kids then get into... Some of these grown men then get into schools.
Yeah.
And then they give young girls a very hard time.
Yep.
There was supposed to be, Bush, a very simple test they could do with these guys coming in who were clearly much older than 15. Some form of DNA test. Clearly, they haven't brought it in yet.
No, they haven't, and they should. Look, it's important because we want to make sure that even for them as migrants themselves, they're getting the right service according to their age. We don't want adults impersonating children and going into classrooms, for example, if they're going to schooling with other children. So certainly this is something that they have to look into. And whilst the number at the moment is quite low, we don't want that increasing. And I think there's a sense of, because a lot of them don't come with IDs,
well, sling it over the side of the dinghy, don't you?
It's hard to tell, what their age really is. But if you have someone in front of you that has a beard and looks like an adult, you know they're not 15 years old.
I know. Just say, I don't believe you, and you're not going into a school, and of course, the trouble is, a lot of these, they then disappear.
The problem is the charities and, the NGOs and often the opposition, they say that, you can't possibly have age checks because they're unreliable, they're inhumane, and all of this.
There is a very, very simple way of checking someone's age, and that's to get dental checks done.
That's what they were going to do, dental checks.
But they say that's against their human rights.
Stuff it. They're coming here illegally, they've crossed the channel illegally, they're lying about their age, so... Forget it.
And if they're not lying about their age, what's the problem with having a dental check?
Exactly,
Totally. Wow. And also, as an adult, why would you want to be treated like a child if you're not one? That to me is the strangest thing, isn't it, really?
The reason is, or as I understand it, is that you get, better benefits, essentially.
Really?
You're more likely to be put in better accommodation. You may be able to access education off the bat. And you'll be looked after more, essentially. If you are an unaccompanied child, you're more likely to be looked after.
And haven't there been stories where unaccompanied children have been put in the care of families?
Yes, that's right.
So they are in the spare room of a mum and dad and sort of like proper little children in a private family home.
But wouldn't you, as a mum or dad, get this? There's something not right about this 15-year-old boy.
People are scared to say anything because they don't want to be called, names.
Racist.
Not on here, we're not. We're not scared.
No, we're not scared on GBNews. We call it out. It's happening too often, frequently, and frankly, it makes a mockery of the border and immigration forces, because they should just say, you're not.
Just another mockery.
Another mockery, because it is a joke what's going on.
We'll move on to this one, because this one, I think, is one for you.
Yeah. Wow. Bar staff language?
Boris Johnson...
Oh, Boris Johnson, yes. Now, this is a fascinating story. He had a nanny for 3 days for the new child. Carrie, the wife, is in prison. Sorry, prison. Hospital. Hospital. Freudian slip.
May feel like
Freudian slip. She's in hospital for a few days, and apparently Boris's mother-in-law saw Boris, then as Prime Minister, having a glass of Prosecco with the nanny who's going to look after her. When Carrie came back, sacked her. this could potentially go to court. Being denied. She's a rather glamorous nanny. If you're watching on TV, she's very glamorous at 59. Let me tell you, I've known Boris Johnson for a very long time. If there's any suggestion by Carrie he was interested in her romantically, she'd be a bit old for Boris. He likes them very young.
Yes, allegedly.
No, I don't know. I think that's the question I raised with Dawn earlier when we were talking about it. I was like, was she an attractive nanny?
Very attractive.
And now that I've seen her picture, I can see that she was.
Yeah. But why wouldn't the Prime Minister, who's employing this woman, want to have a glass of wine in number 10 with her? Why wouldn't he do that?
Well,
because the baby's not arrived yet.
Oh, I was going to say, this was...
Carrie's still in hospital with the baby.
With the first baby, or...
Yeah.
Right, OK, so there was no... She wasn't drinking on duty, that sort of thing. That would be a reasonable reason.
I want my husband to be having a drink of wine with the nanny, would you?
Well, the nanny's not got any nanny work to do at that point.
Yeah.
And it's only day 3, getting to know her. I mean, I suppose it depends what... If you trust your husband.
It's just breaking the ice, Andrew,
Can you trust Boris Johnson? Yeah.
I mean,
also, you know, women are also very territorial, and when you have another attractive woman around your husband, you don't really want that to happen.
So is the answer then, you can only have an unattractive nanny?
Yes.
Right. All three of you.
Have you not seen all of the films and the movies and the books that are about the attractive nanny coming in and stealing the husband away?
Mary Poppins was not unattractive.
No.
She was a nanny.
Mrs Doubtfire.
Mrs Doubtfire?
Wasn't real.
Wasn't real?
That's not real either.
Mrs Doubtfire wasn't real either. OK, Dawn's just being difficult.
So, no, it's interesting. Actually, I can share a story. So my sister has a nanny.
Nanny McPhee, very unattractive.
Yes, Andrew, yeah.
And she wasn't real either.
So, OK, Andrew, here's the question for you then, right? OK, should you and your lovely other half actually have a child that needs looking after? And I know, it's a stupid thing, but should you do that, right? Would you employ a very handsome young male nanny?
The whole thing is preposterous. I would never have a child. I wouldn't have a child.
Answering the question. Answer the question.
No to all of it. We wouldn't have a kid.
Well, you know what? Everyone should have confidence. Yeah, enough confidence.
I'm reeling from the question. I'm reeling from the question.
Andrew,
she knows me well enough.
It happens all the time. When there are stories out there where husbands end up having affairs with the nanny. It's everywhere.
Right. So you've got to employ an unattractive nanny.
You have to.
So what is your qualification for the job? Overweight, don't look very nice, bit smelly. Does that help?
Look at me when you're coming up with that description. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, surely you should just be able to trust your husband. Is the bottom line here? It's not the nanny's fault.
So then you can have Miss World as your nanny.
Yeah, I don't have children either. It's about as likely as you have.
Imagine if Dawn turned up as the nanny, you know, in the pink suit, looking so glamorous. Yeah. Imagine, you know, people would be intimidated.
The idea that Dawn Neeson would be employed as someone's nanny. She likes kids. She likes kids, but she doesn't like them that much.
Do not let me near kitchens or kids.
Or kitchens. Well, we know she doesn't know what to do with a saucepan.
No.
I was a terrible childminder. Tried it a few times. Yeah.
Right.
Terrible.
Right. Well, I had no idea that women took such a hardline view on nannies.
No, actually...
we've got some... Sorry, Dawn, we've got some breaking news, I think. Is it breaking news? Yes. It's just been announced the killer nurse, Lucy Letby, faces a retrial over one attempted murder allegation.
Well, I think she's seeking a retrial, I think, is the point.
Right. Well, has she got it?
I don't think we'll know.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Up next, we're going to be joined...
Has she got it?
Oh, she's going to. Yes, she is.
Right.
That's what it said.
Right.
Right, well, in the studio soon...
GBNews scripts aren't always right, let me tell you.
In the studio soon, Patrick Christie's will be joining us, so we're going to see what's coming up.
Who's he?
Oh, I don't know, never heard of him. Never heard of him.
Quite a nice bloke. I wonder what his view is on nannies.
Oh, God, no. First is the weather. Scrap that.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, we will see some sunnier and brighter moments, but watch out for Wednesday. Could turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now. Lots of sunshine out there, actually, across parts of England and Wales. Still maybe a little bit of overnight rain and cloud just to clear the very far southeast. But for most of us, really, it's a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing the main bulk of the showers, and some of these could potentially be quite heavy, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder. And still quite windy here. That will temper the temperatures somewhat, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs reaching 22 or 23 degrees. Into the evening, a lot of England and Wales remaining dry. Still the risk of some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, especially across more western areas. Elsewhere, under the clear skies, we could see some mist and fog also forming. And then later on in the night, just starting to potentially see some heavy showers working in across the very far south coast of England. A mild night for all of us, temperatures staying firmly in double figures. So these showers will then track their way northwards across parts of England as we go through the course of the morning. Elsewhere, once any early mist and fog clears, briefly drier and brighter, but then further bands of rain moving in from the west, which will be accompanied again by some fairly strong winds, heaviest of the rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But despite the wind, it's going to be another fairly mild one. Temperatures high teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Right, well, Patrick Christys has appeared to tell us about his show, which
I
is
want to know what his view is on ugly nannies. When you're a father.
I think it...
They're so grimy. I'm telling you, it's
passionate. Away a lot of potential stress in the home.
Right.
Why would that be?
Well, I think it's peace of mind.
Do you think that, men can control themselves regardless of what the nanny looks like?
100%. I just think it's an argument that's not worth having, and certainly not on national television.
Right, what's coming up at 3 o'clock?
Obviously not nannies.
Firearms officers, and they never will. Firearms officers handing in their guns. Look, very sensitive subject matter around this case.
It is, yeah.
But I want to know, what does this mean for safety on the streets?
Yeah.
Historically, how well protected or otherwise have firearms officers actually been? And crucially, are they right to do this? OK, are they right to potentially jeopardise public safety? I've got massive sympathy for them.
So have I. But I don't think doctors should be going on strike.
This is the
thing.
thing.
Putting people's lives at risk. And these police officers, great sympathy I've got, they potentially putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah, exactly that. So we'll be having that discussion. Mark White's in Lampedusa for us as well. We're going to be having a long, hard look at the migrant crisis there. There's a story as well about 400 schools, including nursery schools, signing up to this thing called Schools of Sanctuary, where they basically get them to write letters and poetry to refugees, make kids ashamed of their country, and compare illegal migrants to Jesus. So I'll be talking about that quite a lot.
So do you think this is brainwashing or just a nice thing to do, Patrick?
Indoctrination, brainwashing and the politicisation of children, and also the silencing of parents as well, because if you come out against it, you are a refugee-hating bigot.
Comparing them to Jesus?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, this is a Catholic, one of them's a Catholic primary school as well.
Oh, tough, of course it is.
Yeah.
Well, we also had the Pope coming out.
Yes, what's he
to
said?
say some things about the migrant crisis.
Well, I'll be interested to know how many refugees are in the Vatican. I say that as a Catholic.
Well, he's saying that, not to call migrants... It's not an invasion, he's saying. Essentially, refugees welcome, which is what he usually says.
Yeah, it's a very good question. How many migrants are there? We should put a call in.
How many migrants are there in the Vatican? I'm not sure.
How many are in Westminster Cathedral, which is a very big place?
Yeah.
There is a very good charity for the homeless nearby, nothing to do with migrants.
No, exactly that. So, yeah, we'll be talking about all of that. I'm also going to be discussing, of course, the latest on Lucy Letby. We're made to be seeing exactly what the specifics there are. And, as well, the Lib Dem Party conference, HS2.
Exciting.
HS2 being biffed, potentially.
Yeah. Are you excited by the Lib Dem conference?
Oh, I am fizzing with excitement about the Lib Dem.
Tom Harwood is ecstatic to be there by the looks of things.
Oh, well, exactly. I mean, he loves socks and sandals, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's a lot of them there. Yeah. And muesli.
And muesli, yes, indeed. Yep.
Vegetarian food. And no talk about the love that dare not speak its name, taking us back into the European Union.
Well, of course.
Which is what they want to do.
Silence speaks volumes.
The leader won't let them speak about it.
But that tells you everything you need to know, right?
Yeah.
If you had a genuine view that you thought would be popular, you would be talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think they should just,
make it
their policy.
Well,
rejoin the EU under the Lib Dems.
And it would put a lot of pressure on Labour, because a lot of people in Labour want to do the same.
Exactly. It would make Labour come out and make their position more clear.
Keir Starmer's never going to come out.
No.
Vague.
On policy.
On policy. I was about to say more ways than one there, yes.
Right, are we going to see what's happening next?
I think
yes,
we are.
It is the live desk next with Martin Dolby and Ellie Costello. What's coming up then?
Yes, this is very exciting, isn't it? The live desk for the first time for myself and Martin is an absolutely packed show, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, so the big question today is, as counter-terrorism coppers put down their arms in support of their colleagues, is that the right thing to do, or are they just upping the terror risk and putting the public at increased risk?
Yeah, we'll be asking what does it mean for us and what does it mean for the safety on our streets. We're also going to be talking to Mark White in Lampedusa and Jeff Moody, our South West reporter. He's going to be dealing with the Portland issue and how people in Portland are feeling about the Bibby Stockholm barge. Still no migrants on that barge down there. So we're bringing that topic back home and we'll be asking what it means for us.
Sounds like a fantastic show, so stay tuned. Well,
we've come to the end of our show. Our first together.
How did you find it?
Loved it, really loved it, and I'm thrilled we're back together tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday.
What time?
9:30, and we will be going to the Liberal Democrat conference, of course, tomorrow, but not for long.
And Ellie and Martin, they've never done the show together either.
No, there's a lot of firsts here.
There's a lot of firsts here.
And it's very nice to be in the studio with Patrick Christys and your good self.
It is indeed.
Really is.
But yes, we'll be back tomorrow. It's been fantastic. Thanks for all your emails. Back at 9:30, Andrew and Emily.
Britain's Newsroom, tomorrow at 9:30. See you then.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom. GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First